Good evening. Good evening. My name is George Prentice, and before anyone says, what is this person from radio doing at Story Night, I assure you that I was a guest speaker at Story Night a couple of years ago. And so to those folks who are awaiting their turn, if your name will be pulled tonight, I'm certain that you'll be terrified. And that's just the natural experience. You're terrified. You're certain that everyone will just be judging you and deconstructing you with malice, but none of that happens. It's just wonderful. It's wonderful, and everyone is supporting you, and it is the most terrifying, wonderful night of your life. So best of luck to you. And indeed, you have probably heard that tonight's theme is the 90s. I'm excited for that because my entire wardrobe is from the 90s. It was not in fashion then. I was assured that it would be in fashion someday, and January 2020 was not it. So, nonetheless. And so, Boise State Public Radio, we are a proud sponsor of Story Night. And because I'm the guy in the morning, I'm the host of Morning Edition, the question that I am asked often, someone just asked me a couple seconds outside the door, what time do you wake up? And the answer is in about 90 minutes, which is why we're going to get the show on the road. So I'm the lucky guy who gets to introduce one of the most talented people. He also happens to be one of the nicest people, too. And here comes, buckle in, here comes Jody Eichelberger.
I don't know if that was hip-hop or not. Good evening. Welcome to the 90s. Woohoo! First off, I have to thank this individual right here, Mr. Jason Prettyboy from Radio Boise's Inner Workings on Friday mornings. He doesn't get up as early as George, but he does get up pretty early. It starts, what time does the show start? 6 a.m. on Friday mornings. Yeah, I've got some inner workings going on about that time. And now we are going to thank also, of course, our season sponsor, Pettit Group Realty. Thank you. And tonight's show sponsor is the James Castle House. So, structure of show. We have 3 amazing featured storytellers who are going to be up here sharing stories with you. That'll be intermixed with a community story slam. And the way you can participate in the story slam is very easy. All you have to do is walk over to the story booth right over here. I think there's somebody waving their arms over there. Ken and Bob will help you. You fill out a little ticket and drop it in the box. And if we draw you, then you have 5 minutes to tell a story during the show themed on the 90s. So this will be our 10th season doing Story Night in Boise. And to celebrate that, we are doing a show every month that is themed on a decade. We started in November with the 70s. Last month we visited the 80s. And tonight we are here to celebrate the 90s. If only I could have found some clothes that were reflective of that period. This, of course, is what I wore most of the time in the 90s. It might be the first time I have ever worn a pair of overalls. I'm not entirely sure. I actually am really digging them, though. They're so comfortable, and this pocket was probably not designed for a cell phone, but it... Never mind, I can't find it now. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it fits so nicely in that little sleeve. Once again, I'm here with you tonight on borrowed time. I don't know why this keeps happening. But I am in tech rehearsal again for another show that we have our first audience tomorrow. It's called Slow Food at Boise Contemporary Theater. And I didn't actually even take my makeup off, so I might look extra healthy to you tonight. It's that 90s glow. I play a over-tanned, neurotic waiter in a Greek restaurant. And I have discovered that the over-tan part I am able to wash off, but somehow the neurotic part stays. I haven't figured out how to get rid of that. The 90s, though, it's actually is one of the decades that I consider to be one of the most exciting. It was the first time I ever left the country, was in the 90s. I was privileged to study overseas in London in the 90s. And like I said, I'd never been out of the country, and I was so excited. The moment we landed, I was just absorbing everything. And we got on this coach to drive from Heathrow Airport into the city, and I was just like naming everything that went by the window. And I would say to my other students that had come with me, like, "Oh my gosh, look, you guys, they have BP here too." And one of them was like, "Do you know what BP stands for?" I was like, "No." British Petroleum. Oh, okay. And it was, just continued to learn and learn through that experience. It was really fun. That was a pretty limited time of the 90s because I actually spent most of the 90s in a Chevy van driving around the United States as part of an itinerant puppet theater company, performing to schools around mostly in the Northwest, but occasionally we did drive all the way across the country. And the first show that I did with them was Rumpelstiltskin. I played Rumpelstiltskin, the miller's daughter's father, her dog, and the king. So really, she was Lola. We named her Lola, the miller's daughter who spins straw into gold. And I was the cast of others, everybody else, which sometimes was hard to switch fast enough. I'd have to drop the dog and grab the king. And I remember, and it was also, it's a grim fairy tale, of course, so we tried a little bit of a German accent. And I remember I was a little late with the king's entrance, and so Lola was vamping on stage, and I became even later because her vamp didn't go so well. She was in her little German accent, and she was like, where is the king? Where is he? I will just sit right here and wait for him. So that took me another 2 minutes to come out and rescue her from that experience. I can't remember the name of the syndrome. Someone probably remembers that when you become aware of something, suddenly you see it everywhere. And that was happening with me with Rumpelstiltskin. Like, I'd never really, it didn't seem like it was that common, but then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, a reference to Rumpelstiltskin. And that was a reference to Rumpelstiltskin. And I even started dreaming about it. And that particular year, we were mostly in Seattle. And I had a dream that I was mugged on somewhere, I don't know, I was broken down on a Seattle bridge. And this individual was like holding me by a knife and wanted my wallet. And I just opened the back of the Chevy van and reached my arm in and grabbed Rumpelstiltskin.
You don't want his wallet. Get out of here.
I sound like the Wicked Witch of the West just there. So it absolutely took up my dreams and all my time, and we did the show 7-8 times a week for 9 months. So I was very into Rumpel. And that continued with other shows all through, including a show called The Dybbuk, which was a cross between Romeo and Juliet and The Exorcist. That was for adults. We didn't take that to the elementary kids, don't worry. We had plenty of other disturbing shows to take to the children. So, tonight is very special because we have assembled a group of people to share with you that not only have connections to the 90s, but all 3 of them are also men. That's not what makes them special. All three of them are men who have a connection to Story Night in some way. So that's kind of fun. That doesn't always happen. So I'm going to introduce them in reverse order. So first up, which means he will be last, the first shall be last, is a inventor who is responsible for one of the, well, possibly the hottest toy of the 90s. However, he was responsible for bringing life to this creature, and it almost got away from him. It's Caleb Chung. Here he comes. Hey, Caleb. And then we also have an individual. Yeah, sit wherever you like. We also have with us an individual tonight who has suited up for the 90s, Mr. David Lee. But first up to the microphone, and this is very special, this individual is actually a part of the team that created Story Night 10 years ago. One of the co-founders, and I just verified, even though that is the case, this is the first time he has been on the Story Night stage. So that's exciting. So we're going to start right off with our featured storyteller, Mr. Paul Schaefer.
Come on. I see no changes. Wake up in the morning and I ask myself, is life worth living? Should I blast myself? I'm tired of being poor and even worse, I'm black. My stomach hurts, so I'm looking for a purse to snatch. Cops give it to
I just got to dance with Paul Schaefer.
Wow, I haven't done this for a while. My story is a story of my love of story and how that led to the cabin, and as it happens, story night too. In 1989, I followed my heart of my fiancée to Boise. I had been a magazine guy in the Bay Area, and I edited the 100,000 circulation book called the Berkeley Monthly. And the monthly began life as the Berkeley Barb, the 60s voice of the counterculture and free speech movement. It became the monthly about 4 years before I came aboard. But in Boise, the Statesman hired me to help design Scene magazine. And I then became its first editor. But the Statesman and I never managed to get quite on the same page. And I left after a year. And on leaving, I was invited and appointed to the Boise City Arts Commission, which was a real fledgling outfit in those days. We had one less than half-time staff person to support us. But I had the understanding that my fellow commissioners hoped for some kind of literary initiative on my part. There were fewer trees in Idaho's literary orchard at the time. And I had the idea of attending a conference in Missoula that was put on by Bill Kittredge, who's a mythic teacher and writer in the West who chaired the writing program at UM, and Onyx Smith, who's a filmmaker. The conference was biennial, and while I was there, they agreed in spirit to hold it in Boise on alternate years, which was going to be great. I returned home to Boise thrilled. We gathered a group of writers to the commission. I laid out the idea, and they gave it a resounding no. Which was a really good lesson in learning how to meet people where they are. And where we were, this collection of writers was offering the occasional workshop and holding the odd reading. But gradually, the idea took root that a center for writing, for writers, for readers, for literature in Boise was viable. And we petitioned the city council for use of that abandoned log cabin that was next to the library on Capitol Boulevard, Idaho's Main Street. Location, 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 right? So, and ultimately that abandoned log cabin, which was known as the Chateau du Bois, became Log Cabin Literary Center. LC squared, anyone? Simply, in the end, finally the cabin. But that process took several years of lobbying, and we had to formulate a plan that gave shape to the flood of ideas that we had about what a center would do and who we would be. And that plan became the trunk of the tree that is the cabin. So we have a new tree in the orchard now. Several months before the cabin opened its doors, Ivan Doig and his wife Carol were staying with us. And Ivan, of course, is a writer. He lived in Montana, wrote mostly about Montana, but he was read and loved all over the world. And I shared news with them that this group of writers who had now become the first board of the cabin had asked me to be the director. Ivan, in a kind of mischievous, maybe a little bit of a gruff way, allowed us how he wasn't sure administering an arts group counted as, well, adult behavior. He and I clucked over this for a time. And I was pecking at it still later that spring. I had accepted the post. We had been given the keys. We'd hardly moved in. After signing a 50-year lease for $1 a year and a promise to fix up the building and paying with a $50 check so they couldn't throw us out. And this newly minted founding director found myself with Gary Snyder. It was the evening of his talk here, and Gary is a recipient of the National Book Award for his poetry, part of the Beat group of poets. And we walked along the Boise River. We happened to find ourselves just the two of us. And this new director had a definite case of the now what's. And I wanted Snyder, who is a hero. I wanted his advice. I wanted the cabin's roots to run deep, and I wanted its branches to fill the sky. And Gary answered, and I say Gary because we felt thick as thieves in the moment. He said, in my travels in the towns and colleges where I speak, there's a common thread. There's a hunger for story, he said. It is loose across the land. It gives me shivers even tonight to say that. And I paraphrase now. He also said there's a thread and there's a threat because our story as a people is no longer shared. It's fragmented. You could say it's torn, he said, and there's a desperation to reweave the fabric of our community life. This is 1996 now, late spring. A quarter of a century ago. Prescient, do you think? And another thing, Snyder barked. He said, these literary societies, they're revolutionary. It's not tea and cookie hour sitting on the divan. So there really is a hunger for story in the land. I mean, look at the 500 of us or so here tonight. The sold-out seasons of readings and conversations, that star-studded branch of the cabin's tree. Readings and conversations. Wits, writers in the schools, writers in detention centers, writers on reservations, summer writing camps across southern Idaho and our beautiful mountains and floating our wild rivers. Bookfest, writing groups, readings, workshops, classes, agent-editor meet and greets, publishings. These are the branches of the cabin's tree. as the programs moved out into the world, the truth of Snyder's words became more clear and their power more evident. Stories do heal us. Stories help us to understand. Stories have shaped us since before language, when we were grunting around the proverbial fire. Story underpins every art form, even in the form of anti-story. History is told by story, as is the daily news. We follow the thread and we glimpse then the wider fabric. We are our stories. This is why Story Night is so important. The cabin so necessary, so needed. That hunger I also saw in the many thousands, literally tens of thousands, who come through the cabin's doors. And they came to know that their stories mattered because there was a place they could come to begin, even if they didn't know how or where it would lead, simply because the cabin existed, was there visible on Main Street, Idaho. I think it's that way. That was empowering. And that is revolutionary. From the vantage of a quarter century and more now, almost 30 years from the first glimmer in my thought of what would become the cabin, I see my part as a pilgrimage imbued with the intention that is part of any pilgrimage. Before my walk with Gary Snyder, my pilgrimage began, though not consciously, in the years leading up to that walk. And it was literally the same walk along the same stretch of river for those several years. I had been walking several times a week from Municipal Park downstream to the Chateau de Bois and back, while negotiating with the city attorney, the park staff, our group of writers shaping this plan. Week after week, I had been walking my private pilgrimage to what would become the cabin. And in the story of beginnings, the deep beginnings of the cabin, and tangentially Story Night are found there. From a branch of the cabin's tree, a precious fruit let go. And this is in the natural order and proper way of trees and of orchards. A friend of the cabin, a member of our board, Alvin Greenberg, those who knew him, a kind and beautiful man, stormed into my office one day with a sheaf stuffed with clippings and articles about a program in New York called The Moth. So The Moth is the progenitor of programs like Story Night, and they're all over the country. Alvin wanted Boise to have its own moth, and we puzzled for a while. It was several months probably over where the funding was come from, who would be the right people to run it, how this would all come together. Pardon me. When in through the cabin's doors walked Jessica Holmes and Hollis Welch. And they came into my office. They had their own notes. They sat down. I said, yes. And they said, have you heard of Story Night? I said, yes. And my heart raced because Clay Morgan was busy launching the Center for Story at BSU, where Barbara was then teaching. And he had asked how the new center and the cabin, now 15 years old, how we could collaborate, how we could partner. So here it all was. And a trail of meetings followed among we four. What would our moth look like? Where would it be? How would it work? What would we call it? And one afternoon at Lucky 13 in Hyde Park, we were batting these ideas around, and Clay said, "What about Story Night?" And our eyes grew large and our lips silent. Story Night was born. Jessica and Hollis were soon driving not just the mechanics, but the spirit of the program. And as they say, the rest is herstory, maybe plural herstories. And it was, for me, the moment I knew the cabin had fully grown up because of fostering this program that stands so gorgeously on its own. So, very shortly after that, I left the cabin. There was an auto accident, in fact, right in front of the cabin, and I had an injury that kept me from being able to do what I needed to do as well as I needed to do it. But I wanted to say before truth broke in with all its matter of fact about events. Story Night harvests the power of our stories, our humanness, our humaneness, and then replants the seed of that story in each of us. And they've been doing that for the last 10 years now. So I saw Jessica earlier. Thank you, Jessica. And for me, I think of story in the shape and in the words of Bill Kittredge, in fact, who told us over and over, writing, he would say, or telling your story, however you do it, is naming the things we hold sacred. And so for me tonight, this has been a chance to finally name these things that are sacred to me. So thank you.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Paul. Did you ever imagine that your moth would look like this? Hey, do we have the capability to turn the house lights on for a second? So this moth can fly to the light? I just want to have Jessica stand up for a second. Where is she? There she is, Jessica Holmes. Jessica was one of those four, but also hosted the show for 6 years, and she is the gracious spirit that transitioned me into the role that she had for all those years and continues to be a support to me even all this time later. And also, in reflection to our roots, a lot of our password, well, the password to some of our email accounts is moth and, I shouldn't tell you what the password is. I guess I have to change our passwords now. Oh dear. Well, I'll distract you with with something. Chateau de Bois. I like that. I think I might want to start using that. Chateau de Bois. Sometimes, you know me as Jody Eichelberger, but I do often also go by Jody Eichelberger. But only when I'm at Chateau de Bois. And speaking of location, here is a message from our season sponsor, Pettit Group. In the 1990s, Andrea Pettit stood in the rain to watch the Boise River Festival's annual Night Light Parade along the river. She got to the State Street Blockbuster early on Fridays to rent the newest movies. She hosted her wedding reception at the Flicks. She made dozens of trips to home base to fix up her house and followed careful advice to prep for Y2K. And started a family. These days, Andrea is frequently helping sellers prepare their 90s-built homes for the real estate market. Fun fact, 17% of residential real estate properties in 2019 were homes built in the 90s. fun. Regardless of the decade, Andrea and the Pettit Group make every home shine in our marketplace. Thank you to the Pettit Group. Now, this is normally the time where we bring up our slammer box and select a slammer, and Ken is right on it. He's bringing it over here. Only, guess what, Ken? Tonight, you don't need to bring it to me right now because we have pre-selected a slammer. I'm just, I could have tricked you. I could have pretended to bring a ticket up and read the name, but here's the deal. You're going to be okay with this. But first, let me tell you the rules. So it's 5 minutes to share a story inspired by the theme 90s. We try to keep it PG-13, so like 90s movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, Dumb and Dumber. Maybe, was that PG-13? I don't know. No, okay. Stick with Mrs. Doubtfire. Language. Appropriate language for Mrs. Doubtfire. And if you run long, I will rise up out of my chair, and Jason Prettyboy will start to mix some soulful, not soulful tonight. I don't know how do you describe music from the 90s. Like this. It'll be like this. And that'll let you know you're running out of time. But we had a really special opportunity. I was contacted by a group from One Stone, which is a student-led nonprofit that high school students are able to go to. They, I don't believe, are charged anything to be part of the program. And it's about leadership, and it's about making our world a better place. And they did a deep dive into storytelling and invited me to come just last Friday to listen to 7 of their students share stories about the 90s, which I thought, that sounds really hard, because none of them were alive. So we're gonna need some creative spins on the 90s, and listen, they did it. So the deal I made is, let's do one of you will have a guaranteed slot here to share your story, and then the rest of you can put your name in the slammer box, and maybe you'll be in the second half of the show. So you are all going to get to hear this individual, and then maybe later you'll hear more from that One Stone group. But right now, let's give a raucous round of applause to Declan.
So I live in a memory of the 1990s. I had initiated it in elementary school by looking at photos of my mom while she was in high school in the Navy, aka the 90s. I've always loved looking at photos of my mom happy and with her friends. It's always given me hope for my future. I've also been very fascinated about a time before me, because I was born in 2002. The 90s was a time before my mom had grown out her hair, before she'd gotten braces and lost the iconic Bryan family snaggletooth, and before she'd moved to Idaho. At the time, my mom was living in Albany, Oregon. She went to West Albany High School, class of 1993, go Bulldogs, and she was living next to the Lynn Benton Community College in what is now student housing. So a lot of the furniture and objects in my house are from the 90s. The other night, my mom pulled out this Winnie the Pooh Tupperware bowl that she'd bought like halfway through that decade. And not to sound dramatic, but I swear we have not bought a single piece of kitchenware since 1998. A lot of the media I was surrounded by as a child was from the 90s and late 80s. I was obsessed with movies like Forrest Gump and Aladdin, and I vividly remember waking up every morning before elementary school and scurrying into the living room to watch Boy Meets World and Sabrina the Teenage Witch with my mom. And it might appear that I am another 17-year-old who didn't go through the 90s, that has a peculiar fascination with the 90s, and you're correct. But that is not my full story. So my mom and I are 2 different people. We often argue over whether to eat dinner in downtown Boise or Meridian. But one thing we've always bonded over, oddly enough, is the 90s. It was a happy time for her, and I just love seeing my mom happy. It makes me the happiest. And I love going through all the photos I have in my room and showing them to her and her telling me a descriptive story about each photo. And I also love when we watch movies like Wayne's World or Good Will Hunting, two completely different movies. And she retells stories when she first saw them and reconnects with her old high school friends. I also love when my mom goes through the storage unit and finds her old clothes from high school and gives them to me. One particular garment is her navy boot camp sweatpants. They're my favorite article of clothing. Every time I wear them, I feel like I can be as strong as my mom was when she was wearing them. And her Mickey Mouse polo shirt, whenever I wear it, I feel like I can be as brave as she was when she was wearing it. And this electric blue windbreaker brings me back to her vivid memories of being in Virginia Beach. These stories about Albany and my mom's life in the 90s feel more like home to me than Boise does at times. It's the stories of my mom spending her summer in Gig Harbor with her aunt. It's my Uncle Brent living in the garage in Albany and pushing his furniture out onto the driveway in the summertime. It's my mom's friend Avelina, who kind of resembles Keanu Reeves. It's my mom and her friend Sarah posing with the English teacher that no one liked. I see her stories through these photos, and I live in a memory of the 1990s. That's to say, I do not live solely through these photos. Inspired by them, I make memories of my own, and I take pictures wherever I am all the time, so that one day when I form little offsprings, they'll have these pictures to look at and smile at, and show me when they want to make me smile too. Thank you.
It's not in the 90s colors, but
Oh well, thank you.
thank you so much. Wonderful. Oh, Paul, stories are loose on the land. Gives me hope for the future. Was I happier in the 90s? I'm not sure. Gosh, I graduated in 93. That means I could have kids that... I always say the friends that I have that don't have children, we get to remain like eternally youthful. And then the friends that have kids, I'm like, stop it. They're what? They're going to college now? Oh my gosh, we got so old. Where are my friends that don't have kids? Yeah, boy. Jessica's one of them. Jessica and I remain eternally youthful, don't we, Jessica? She just had a birthday. Well, we're going to go back to the 90s again with our next featured storyteller. And this individual has been a slammer many times before. And in fact, he once was selected to have his slam story turned into a mini musical here on our stage, which turned out beautifully. And then twice he has been selected for our Slammer of the Year competition. And this is the first time he's been selected as a featured storyteller. So please welcome again to the Story Night stage, but this time to the featured storyteller, Mike, Mr. David Lee.
Is that working? Is this thing? Okay. Good evening. I've really enjoyed this year's theme, Decades. I think it's partly because I recently retired and I find myself doing a lot of flashing back on memories, if you will, flipping through the Rolodex that is my life and finding how things fall out in neat little chapters. And I found in my case those chapters kind of line up nicely with the decades, and that was particularly true of the 90s. That was an incredible time of transformation for me. For one thing, in 1989, I finished law school. I lined up a job down here in Boise, came down here to take the bar that summer, got sworn in that fall, and right after that started to work. So you might say the 90s were the start of my life as a young suit and tie wearing professional. And since Jody suggested costumes, I decided to try to come dressed as a younger version of myself. It's been in the closet for a while, but I think it looks okay. Anyhow, that was really, really quite a change for me. For one thing, before I went to law school, I didn't even know how to tie a tie. But it wasn't just a matter of ties or clothing. It was a matter of attitude and lifestyle. Before I settled down and went to law school, I actually spent a lot of time as something of a wandering hippie-esque youth. I moved around a lot. I did a lot of odd jobs. I was always just kind of hovering right above the brink of being broke, but getting by, and that was good enough. Like I said, I lived a lot of places. One of the places I lived was McCall, Idaho, where I lived from '83 to '84, and once again, got by various odd jobs there. When I wasn't doing those odd jobs, I was playing in the lake or up at the ski hill or floating the river or various other fun stuff. Eventually, I decided I had to get serious, grow up, if you will. So I went to law school and yada, yada, yada. I finished law school and ended up here in Boise. And here I am at the dawn of my legal career, and wouldn't you know it, now, contrast this to the background I just described, I actually started to work for one of the largest firms in Boise, or the largest firms in Idaho. It was rather prestigious, elite, you might say. You also might say stuffy or snobby. And by the way, people ask me, was that your dream to work at a big law firm like that? And the answer is heck no. That was way, way too establishment for me. And furthermore, it kind of came as a surprise to me anyway, because in law school they were kind of warning us, well, if you want to work for those big firms, you gotta be in the top 10, you gotta be on law review, moot court, all the bells and whistles. And I didn't have any of that, but somehow I managed to have the right assortment of background and relevant work experience that this firm liked me, and they offered me a position. Not only that, but they offered me a salary that was a fair chunk higher than a lot of my colleagues and classmates were getting at that time. And like I said, it was prestigious. And if nothing else, it could offer me some resume building experience that might come in handy later on, which it did. So I took the job. And by the way, there are some other intangible perks to it as well, one of which was the view. This particular firm at the time occupied the entire 16th floor of what is now the U.S. Bank building, and then I think it was the West One building. And that was a nice little perk to have, particularly if you're out downtown for dinner and drinks and you want to impress your friends. Say, hey, you want a nice view of the city in all directions? Yeah, come on, let me show you my office. That was pretty cool. That was a nice perk. But that and all the other perks started to lose their luster after a while when I kind of got to realize the stresses and pressures of this particular work environment. It was definitely a high stress, high expectation kind of job. Definitely a grind to get billable hours, and you got to deal with the personality types of the senior partners. And overall, sometimes it seemed like it was a competition as to see who's more willing to sell their soul to the company store to get ahead. Anyhow, it was stressful, and I found my ways to get stress relief. Among other things, I sampled the local watering holes and happy hours. And eventually I found one of those watering holes that quickly became my favorite. There's a place called the Iron Gate Lounge. This was in a hotel called the University Inn, located right at the edge of BSU, at Capitol and University, right where the Micron College of Business now stands. But anyhow, that was an interesting place, had an interesting assortment of regulars, and pretty soon I was one of them, and got to know all the regulars, and of course I got to know the staff. In particular, I remember one of the cocktail waitresses there, whose name was Sabrina, which Jody wanted me to point out happened to be a 90s TV show, but our other speaker already pointed that out. By the way, when I said I lived in McCall before, I did many jobs, but one of the jobs I did is I worked as a substitute teacher. So here I am, I don't know, 10 years or so later, and I'm meeting, did I mention Sabrina was from McCall? I might have forgot that part. So we reminisced about McCall a little bit, and eventually kind of did the math, and I figured out, I think she was one of my students when I was a substitute teacher. And I asked her about it, whether she remembered me. She didn't remember anything at all, but I still, I still came into the bar, see her now and then. I'd bring it up now and then. She still never remembered. Not until one time, this was actually, I think she was getting ready to leave town, and the gang got together, I think at another bar, to give her a send-off. And at that particular gathering, I started reminiscing about my substitute teaching days again. And this was kind of a funny story. I was talking about this one particular time I was put in charge of overseeing, I think it was a 7th grade social studies class. And they were all supposed to be quietly working on an assignment. And there was this group of like 3 or 4 girls in the middle of the room who just kept laughing. Little girls, and I'd tell them to stop and be quiet and work, and they'd say, okay, we'll stop, and they'd stop for a second, they'd start laughing again. And I wasn't the best disciplinarian. I strived instead to be the cool, but sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. But anyhow, this little eruptions of laughter kept happening, and at one point I got frustrated and tried to put on my authoritarian hat and kind of walked up to the group, finger wagging and everything, and said, listen, girls, you're supposed to be working. Now, what's so funny? Do you want to just share it with the rest of the class? And they all say, no, it's okay. We'll be quiet. We'll be quiet. And then I turned around and walked back to the front of the room. Suddenly, I realized the source of their amusement. Turns out this entire time, my fly had been open. And at this point, again, I'm at this send-off for Sabrina, and I'm telling her this story, and suddenly she lights up and she says, I remember you now. Couldn't help but wonder, I don't know why it was so important to me that she remembered me at that time, but, maybe for the same reason why this story has come back to mind at this point in time. I think it's partly because both then and now there was a part of me that really, really wanted to hearken back to my younger, more freewheeling, wandering self. Wasn't long after that conversation, I did make a change. I left a big firm. I took a job with the state, far more relaxed and laid back. Had extra holidays and vacation, and you could actually use your holidays and vacation without getting a guilt trip from the senior partners. So, it was probably more in keeping with my younger wandering self. I still had to work, still had to show up, so I didn't have all the freedom that I had back in the 80s, but I wasn't broke all the time either. My 80s wandering self probably wouldn't have envisioned my working behind the same desk for 20 years, which is what I did there. But as it happened, that worked out pretty well for me. It brought me a lot of security, and more than anything, it brought me the ability to retire. So now I can start wandering anew again. So that's kind of exciting. And I think I've been, first, like I said, this is a costume. This is my 90s self. But I couldn't help but wonder, what if I wanted to come dressed up as my 80s self? What would that look like? I'm not sure, but I have a feeling it would look pretty similar to my current day retired self. I might have blue jeans instead of cargo pants, but you know, pretty close. And I think, but whatever I'm wearing, what really matters is I hope as I enter this next, or continue on this next chapter of life, I hope I can continue to embody the attitude and the wonderment of that wandering young 80s self. And so far, I think I've done a pretty good job doing that. I've been wandering along through life with no particular place to go, but finding interesting places to be. I've had a variety of adventures, not the least of which is a couple of trips to the Story Night stage. What's my next adventure? I don't know. That's the wonder of it. That's the beauty of it. Besides that, we can't predict the future, can we, right? Although there's one thing I think I can predict with reasonable confidence. Whatever my next adventure is, I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to be wearing this.
Yes, I guess we all wonder what our legacy will be. For some of us, it's an open fly. No, I'm sure it's much more than that. Our show sponsor tonight actually is a great legacy. Located at 5015 Eugene Street, the James Castle House celebrates the life and work of American artist James Castle. Rooted in Castle's sense of wonder and discovery, the James Castle House is a center for contemporary and historical exhibits, tours, talks, residency programs, and community partnerships. You can learn more at jamescastlehouse.org. And we were looking at what kind of connection we could make between James Castle, the man, and the 90s. And as it turns out, James Castle was born in the 90s, the 1890s. And then this interesting little fact that also came along is we could also have the James Castle House as our sponsor for our Zero Zeros show coming up next, because James Castle's headstone says that he was born in the year 1900, and it's wrong, because census records show him as a little baby in 1899. So that's his connection. I want to take just a moment, too, to invite one of our studio guides up here, Chanel Stinner. She's going to be up at the back table during intermission right here, where we have our little studio guide info center. And you're welcome to visit her during intermission, which is coming up here real quick. But you don't often get to hear from the people who are a little more behind the scenes, that are out working in the community, having experiences with different cultural groups and school groups. And so Chanel is just going to share a little bit about some of the experiences that she's had as a studio guide that stand out to her now. She's been doing it for a few years now. And you can also get to know her better at the she's leading the studio session on February 1st here at Jump. So Chanel, hi.
Wow. Oh, it's bright up here.
Yeah, we got bright lights. It's good for moms.
Hi. Gosh, I really feel like I missed the opportunity to wear like a Nirvana t-shirt and a flannel. I feel like the 90s gave us that. They gave us grunge, permission not to comb our hair. So I got to tell you, I really love being a studio guide. I love working with Story Night. I actually got involved by going to a studio, and I saw one of my friends there, and she said, I want to connect you, and maybe you can be a guide too. And I have to tell you, I have heard some of the most amazing stories and worked with some amazing organizations in the community, from the Idaho Women Lawyers to the Boise School District to the Idaho Office of Refugees. And I absolutely love listening to stories. Stories are really threads that we all have that weave this interconnectedness between all of us. They really bring us together. Our threads cross with all the threads of the people around us. And at every intersection, there's a story. So coming together in a room full of strangers and letting our threads touch and creating new intersections and finding new stories is extremely powerful. It can be very healing. I've had all women groups where we talk about addiction and abuse and everybody cries. I've had great stories that are just there to make us laugh, to warm us up. There was a story about a family who lost their cat in some small town on a trip across the country. And 3 months later, a little old lady who collected all the lost pet flyers found this cat and shipped it across the country back to the family. And it was just amazing. So I encourage you to sign up for a studio and come find your story. Thank you.
Incidentally, that cat story is now available on Disney Plus. It's called COD. How do you spell cat? COD. There, I improved it. Another opportunity we have is a new show called Story Story Slam Night, which is a night at the lounge at the end of the universe at the Gem Center for the Arts up on the bench, where there are no featured storytellers. It's just slams, and it's about 30 to 60 people, so much more intimate, where you can, if you go to a studio, you could then go up there and try it out on a smaller audience before you bring it here. Or you can come straight here. I don't care. That works. So please do, during intermission, you can visit Chanel. You can also visit James Castle House and Pettit Group out in the lobby. Pettit Group is doing a raffle for some artwork that you can take away with you to have in your home, and we'll do that raffle right at the top of the second act. So we'll see you in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. This is off our first record. Most people don't own it. I need an easy friend, I do, with a head to land, I do. Think you fit this shoe, I do, but you my sister. She didn't scream, she didn't make a sound. I forgive you, boy, but don't leave town. Cold black skin, naked in the rain. Hammer flashing the lightning, I heard it again. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. Let me put you in the picture, let me show you what I mean. The Messiah is my sister, ain't no king, man, she's my queen. I had a dream and it seemed the light, don't put it out, and she's alright, yeah, she's my sister. You are the one supreme being, just dressed to kill and fulfill just any
I don't know if you heard that little chime. It's like the old bum, bum, bum. They used to walk through the lobbies. I don't know what era I'm in, like silent film era. They'd walk through the lobbies and hit the little chime that said, it's time to get back to your seats. Well, Stephen made the Story Night chime based on our theme song. I'd ask him to play it again, but I know it's okay, he is going to do it. All right. I know it's very complicated. There are lots of buttons. Isn't that great? I kind of want to be able to trigger, maybe we can get a foot pedal in the future, and I can just, oh, it is a foot pedal. And I can just step on it at key moments, like when I want to arch my eyebrow or something. Ira glass it, that's it. Paul did let me know that one of my straps is not attached. I explained to him that according to our stylist, this is correct. So in case any of the rest of you are worried we're going to have a wardrobe malfunction, it's okay. All right, let's bring up Andrea, who we are going to auction off this amazing photograph by local artist Sue Latta. And Andrea was telling me she was in a residency in upstate New York. Sue was. And she took 17,000 photos during that residency, a 5-week residency. And this is number 2 of 10. So there are 16,990 more of these out in the world. And we're going to give this one away tonight. And do you want to read the winner?
Sure.
All right.
The winner is Lucille Grooms.
Congratulations, Lucille.
All right.
You can meet, and thank you, Andrea. You can meet Andrea right over here before she races off to the Blockbuster on State Street. All right, I'm going to invite our featured storytellers to come back onto stage and take their seats. They're all bonding over here in the corner. That's sweet. Paul now has alcohol. Good. You can tell which one hasn't told their story yet because he's carrying bottled water. Before we get to our last featured storyteller of the night, I do want to spontaneously have a slammer, and we have got lots of slammer tickets in our bucket tonight, which is pretty exciting. So, Ken, if you would bring that box over. Remember, it's 5 minutes somehow inspired by the theme 90s. I suppose it could be a 90-second story, then we'd fit more of them in. And let's have come up right now. There's a couple of different ways I could say this, but I'm just going to say the first name because I think it's unique enough. Can we get Noah to the stage, please? Noah, you are going to share your story. Oh my gosh. Wow. I didn't know this was happening.
Me either.
All right, here we are.
We used to wear eyeliner in the 95s, but then Adam
They
Lambert
don't
put
know
it out of style.
They don't know I have eyeliner on.
Okay, you look gorgeous. So my earliest memories are listening to the Shondells and Electric Light Orchestra on 8-track in my head. And growing up, I only believed that the radio played golden oldies. My first concert was the Beach Boys. My dad drove us for like 6 hours to go listen to them. And so I was like a little bit repressed musically growing up, and I would sneak out at, after dark and go to my friend's house and listen to MTV and watch MTV, and just started to like have my mind opened. And I was a swimmer growing up. So I went to swim practice one day, and my buddy said to me, like, hey, do you know Joe Allen? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, he's dead. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you, and whose army? And he's like, no, he's dead. And I was like, no way, like, I know Joe. And I just fell into this deep depression. And then like 2 days later, I went to swim practice, and he's like, "Hey, Kurt Cobain is dead." And I was like, "Oh my God, like, Brad, I really hate you. You're like the bringer of all bad news." And I just got sunk in this depression, and my dad saw me depressed, and he was like playing his music loud in the house, and just it wasn't helping me. It's because I was like, "Dad, I need more than Buddy Holly to get me through this." And so it was coming up to like the regional championship, and I was a butterflyer, and he was like, "Noah, anything you want. If you just put your maximum effort, if you win, just anything you want." Now, like, we were kind of on like state aid at the time. We didn't have cable. We just watched, public television, and that was awesome. But I was like, I want my MTV. Like, I want cable and MTV. And he's like, "All right, we'll do it." And so I practiced, and my shoulders got hurt. I had to go through physical therapy, and then I was like visiting my mom out of state, and I had to train with that age group. And then I'm in the pool, I'm on the starting blocks, and I jump off, and I'm swimming, and I hit the wall, and I turn around, and I'm swimming, and it feels just like this piano hits me on the back. I'm like, "I gotta do this for MTV, I gotta do this for MTV." And I effing won! And I got my MTV. And so then it was Pearl Jam and Candlebox and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana just blaring loud in the house. And I got a Sony Discman. And we wired it into our 1980s Chevy Caravan. And as we were doing that, we got it all hooked up, and my dad helped me, and he's like, "So what do we play?" And I was like, "You don't even have a CD, bro." So I pulled out Nirvana, and I plugged it in, and we played All Apologies, and we both just sat there imagining what it would be like to be high at the time, commiserating with each other, and that bonded us. And tonight, it's like whatever it is. I graduated high school in 1995, and it seems like whatever it is at the peak, whether your icon is Marilyn Monroe or Bob Marley or Jim Morrison or Kurt Cobain. Like, there are these people in life that leave this indelible mark on us. And I'll tell you guys, my children, who are now both in college, first year and third year, we have one vinyl in our house right now, and it's Nirvana's Unplugged album. And so they probably MF me all the time. All we thought was that it was just grunge, and now they're off to their things. Anyway, thank you, Kurt. I love you. We will never forget you.
And Noah, if you want a poster, I've got one here for you. I'm gonna... Oh, he's coming back. Oh, good. Goodness. My musical taste, boy. I mentioned that tour partner, that driving in the Chevy van, going across the country with our puppet show. And the rule was our driver was in charge of the music. And my dad got me a speaker set that I could run the power off of the cigarette lighter, because the vans didn't have any device for tapes or CDs or anything. And I was like, "Oh, Dad, I'm just not getting along with my tour partner. I mean, we have this rule that the driver gets to decide what music we listen to. And, I've been playing this CD of Tibetan monks, and she just gets so irritated." And my dad got real quiet. I think he took her side. Well, what can you do? Our next featured storyteller is back on the Story Night stage after some years. He was featured as a Starry Story Night teller at BCT back in 2014 for our show Curiosity. And I was super curious to have him share again this evening. Please welcome back Mr. Caleb Chung.
Thank you, Jody. I actually own that shirt. I did, yeah. In the early '90s, I was a was a street mime, and then I was a children's performer. And I probably did 1,000 shows in my shirt that's like that. That's how we made a living. That's it. That's right. You're making me mad. I'm not doing it. You're a bad person. Okay. All right. For those of you that did not have kids in the 90s, this is a Furby. Yes. There's about 50 million of these. And so there's a good chance that there's one in your house somewhere. And it's probably in a bottom drawer or a dark closet, and it's just waiting to scare the crap out of you. Kind of a Furby sleeper cell. So the batteries pretty much last forever in standby mode, and there's no off switch like my wife says of me, and they respond if you disturb them. So this is just apology in advance if your grandmother goes in and she dies because. So I'm going to tell you a Furby story. Jody asked if I would speak on Furby, and I said no. And my wife goes, good. My wife's name is Christy. She's right over there, so I have to be careful. But I finally said yes because we have a Furby story that we have not told, if you can believe it, and we haven't said anything about this part of the story for almost a quarter of a century. So 23 years we have not talked about this. So it's not funny. And stories that connect us and these kind of things, this is kind of a little cathartic for us, or for me, to talk about this. So I have to take you back to the summer of 1998, and it all starts about here. So my wife and Christy and I are home, and we hear a knock at the door. And we go to the door. It's like late June, early July. Open the door, and there's a well-dressed young man, a Chinese guy, standing there with a briefcase. And I know he's Chinese because he looks like half my family. So he's standing there, and he looks a little lost. Like, am I at the right address? He doesn't look like he belongs on my porch. And he says, excuse me, he had a little broken English. He says, I heard you had something to do with the Furby. And this is a very strange thing to happen, but so I have to step aside. Let's leave him there for a second, and I have to give you a little background on why he might be there. About 5 months earlier, Furby had debuted at the New York International Toy Fair in New York, and it's every year in February. And Furby was there for the first time, and the trade is there to see him, right? And the news is crazy. He was a big hit there, and suddenly there's all this news all over the place. I think Wired magazine actually did an article on it, like a 5-page article in Wired, and that's not like a toy magazine, right? It's like Moody Furballs or something like that. And then there was a New York Times article in Popular Science, and it was like everyone was writing about this crazy new toy that everyone was expecting to see in the coming Christmas. And I think it was partly because the year 2000 was coming up, and everyone had tech on their minds, and this was like a tech toy, that was probably the main thing. And then, of course, all the PR machines are going for the toy companies, and they're all ramping it up. Anyway, it's everywhere. So we wonder if it's something to do with that. So we invite him in, and he comes in, and he sits, in our living room, and he explains why he's there. So he says, well, I'm from a large San Francisco law firm, and there's been a claim by Warner Brothers Pictures against Hasbro, the manufacturer of Furby, that they possibly have copied their character this Mogwai character, which is a little furry thing from a 1984 film called Gremlins, right? And, you know, there goes the house, honey. So we'll see. we hope not. Anyway, so he's there, and he says, I've been to, you know, he's investigating, right? And so he's been to all the places that have said they came up with Furby, because he needs the design materials. He's looking for, you know, this paper trail. And he said he was at Hasbro, and they're the manufacturer, and they don't have any early materials at all. There's no, you know, like invention kind of papers. And then he goes to Tiger Electronics, who did the big article in Wired magazine, and they don't have anything. And finally, he went to the agent, Richard Levy. You know, he's gone to everyone who's been in the news, except for this guy who's like the newly famous inventor of Furby, this guy, Dave Hampton. And he's the one in all the news, right? And so he doesn't know this, but this like brings up all kinds of bad feelings for us. He's a nice guy, it's not his fault, but this is just like knife in the gut to hear this name again. So I have to go back in time again about another year. So we're going to leave him there for a second on the couch. And he had asked, you know, do you have any design materials? You know, I've been to all these people, and they all say they're the inventor. And do you have any design materials here? You know, I found your name. You know, it must have been on the patent or something. I don't know how he found our name, but we were his last place he could check. So yeah, so we're you know, at that moment we're not feeling really good. And the reason is a year before, well, actually started out really good about a year before. Dave and I are at the previous New York Toy Fair, and we're walking the aisles of Toy Fair. This is 1997, February. And Dave and I knew Dave from Mattel when we worked in this Blue Sky group, and he's really good at electronics, and we've kind of kept in touch over the years. And I'd invited Dave to come to Toy Fair. He'd never been before, and since it's a trade-only show, not the public or allowed, only you know, trade kind of people in the toy industry can go. So my wife and I had a little business called Giving Toys. That was the name of the company. And right underneath it, on our card, it said Beauty and Magic. And so if you read it, it's, you know, giving toys, beauty, and magic. And that was pretty much our mission statement. That's, you know, what we were trying to do in the world. And so we put Dave's name on there. And so Dave and I, it's like at 205th Avenue by the Flatiron Building, and it's 1 million square feet, right? And, you know, Hasbro, and there's 1 million companies there. We walk as many as we could. And then it's that night, and it's the last night, we're staying at the Mayflower Hotel on Upper West Side. It's not there anymore. And we have this dingy little room that we're splitting. And I'm trying to talk Dave into doing something together, because I'm hoping we can collaborate, because I do mechanics and creature design, and he does electronics, so let's do something together. And it's always hard to get someone to invent with you, so I keep pitching ideas. How about this? How about this? How about this? And the reason he's reluctant is because you don't get paid for inventing unless you actually get the license, and otherwise it's just all risk. And Dave and I both did, and Christy and I, we did development for other people, toy companies, whoever. So if we stop doing that and we invent, then, you know, you're risking. So I wasn't getting through to him. Nothing was sparking. And so I finally said, Dave, what do you want to do? And he thinks for a minute. He's taller than me. He thinks for a minute. He says, I just want a little guy that can be my friend. And I joked that I would have said, you know, I thought that was me, Dave, you know. But I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. I said, great. That's what I want to do too. Let's do that. Good. I've been pitching, you know, artificial pets and these kind of things at Mattel for years, and no one got why. So if Dave wanted to do that too, I'm all in. So we decided I'd go back to Boise, he'd go back to California, and over the next, you know, hopefully spring and summer, I could come up with something that would be a creature or a thing that we could both do together. It's my job to do that part, and then I'd contact him, and he could add some electronics, and then we'd go pitch it. So now it's spring, and it's going into summer, and Christy and I are, you know, now Christy's my design partner. My wife, We do everything together. So if I say I mean we. You know, especially on Furby, it's just very natural for me to say I a lot because I'm very self-involved. But I mean we, okay? So anyway, so we're working all summer, and it's fun. You're creating a creature, you're trying to bring something to life, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience. If you write or make movies or do something, at some point your work takes on a life of its own. And in my case, when I get there, it kind of looks at me. And it's kind of a little spooky because it goes, I'm here, right? And so we had this little creature, looked like a little Australian bush baby, but it was very realistic and kind of cute. And I made a little controller so I could make it move so we could do it like a pitch to a toy company. So get on a plane, I fly to California, and Dave lives, he's an electronics guy, but he lives off the grid, or used to, by the National Forest, and he'd go out, start his generators, and run his PC. So I went to his house, and I know weird people. So I sit at his kitchen table, and I show him Furby for the first time. Well, he's never seen it, right? We've talked over the summer, but he's never seen the thing. I'd call him now and then, Dave, we need a microphone, and we need a touch sensor, and we need this, and he'd, write it down. But he hadn't done anything yet, right? He nothing to build yet. So I show up, and I show him Furby, and then, we talk about it, and then we, right there at his table, we also come up with the Furbish language. We had a good time doing that. Now it's time to sell it. I'm still there. We're going, okay, we got to find a toy company to take this to. This is the hard part, is finding someone who's going to license it and give you money for this idea, and then you make a little bid on each one. And so we finally, I got a hold of a guy named Richard Levy, who is a pretty well-known toy guy, certainly now. He's an inventor, and he would also broker deals. And I knew this, and I also knew that I wanted to take this to Tiger Electronics. Now, they were an independent company, but they were the right profile for this company. So he got us a meeting because he knew them. And so one thing led to another, and they said yes. So they said, yes, we want to do this Furby product. And, wow, that's exciting. That's fantastic. But we want it for Toy Fair, which is in 12 weeks. And we want you to build, multiple of them, and they want working models of different colors, because it's like a Beanie Baby line. And we want it all ready for Toy Fair. And that's really hard to do. It took me all summer to make one. How am I going to make, 6 or whatever? And so Christy and I work. And those 12 weeks were probably the hardest of my life. Certainly, not Christy, she's had 3 kids, so I know that she's, so this was nothing, but no, it was hard, and mostly because we were separated a lot, and we work well together, but when we're separated, I just have a hard time. I need her to work with me. So then what happened next, though, that was kind of the part we don't like to talk about. What happened next is it makes it to Toy Fair, and it's a big hit, right? And it, right there, and right when it's introduced, Hasbro announces they're going to buy this little company, Tiger Electronics, and this is the cherry on top. So Furby was like instrumental for Tiger getting bought by Hasbro. It's a big deal. And so we go home. I go home, I'm exhausted, and then we start watching the news. And we realize that we've been completely erased from the narrative. Yeah, there's no Caleb and Christy in this at all. Richard Levy, the agent, has decided to put himself in the middle and say, I made this happen, right? I made all this happen. I ran the show. Anyway, and then Tiger did the interview with Wired Magazine, and all the stuff like they did, right? So we invented Furby, right? There was this guy named Eric, but then they wouldn't say Dave's name, but that's all they did. And then, but then Dave starts showing up in the news, and he's in like Popular Science or whatever it was, and he's there holding Furbies, the inventor of Furby, genius inventor of Furby, and I'm just like, oh God, I can't look at that, right? It's like incredibly painful. There was one TV show, 2020, I guess it was. It was a long format video show, and I turn on the TV, and there's Dave walking by his property in the woods, and there's an interviewer walking with him. So Dave, how did you come up with the Furby? And I'm watching, he goes, well, I saw an owl. And she goes, a wise owl? Yes, a wise owl. I saw an owl, and that's how I got the idea. And I was, oh, you know, it's, oh my goodness, is that painful, right? So I've never even shown Christy that. So anyway, all this stuff is going on, and so now we're back in the living room, and there's this guy, this really nice guy, you know, do you have any design materials for Furby, right? Because we'd like to prove if it was, you know, one way or the other. So I look at Christy, and we go, okay, and we go over to this closet, and we start bringing out crates, right? And there's a big crate there. Yeah, here's another big crate. You know, we had like 4 of those clear crates with the flip tops full of design materials, because, you know, we invented the thing, right? So it's from the very beginning, the first scribbles, all the way through into the brand and the storylines, and all the mechanics are in there, and all her drawings in there, and my design books, and every page is signed, and you can do a flip book and watch, you know, like Furby appear. You know, it was so well designed. And so we bring these out, and we put them by the kitchen table, and he sits down and, you know, starts going through each one, right? And as he's pulling out each one, it's like we're reliving each of these moments. Oh, what's this? Oh, look at that. Okay, you know, and it's like it's all coming up again. All the beauty and magic of creating something, having the joy of bringing something to life that is just this marvelous little thing. And then thinking about what happened, right? It's like, you know, having a kid, having it adopted, and having them, you know, be taken away. Anyway, so the question, you know, I came to writing this was, you know, why did we do that? Why didn't we, you know, it was real hard for Christy and I not to rail against the injustice. You know, our friends and family are going, get them, you know, this is horrible, right? They feel horrible. It was harder for them. But we decided to not say anything, and that was really a difficult thing to do. And it's because, you know, you have to make a choice who you are in the world, right? And Furby was really the choice that we're going to give beauty and magic, to the toy industry. And that was the heart of what we were doing. And if we interjected into this conversation, you know, the national news was calling me. They called me on the phone, says, what about this you know, scandal going on? You know, are you the inventor? What's going on? And, you know, I really, really wanted to say those words that, you know, this guy's an imposter, you know, all this whole thing. But we didn't. And so we had to talk about it for a long time. And it's, well, you know, there's no question we're on the contracts. There's no question about the patent. We're going to get the money, but we're not going to get the credit. And that's okay. And it's okay because we already have all the stuff that we need. We have each other. We have our family. We already live in paradise here in Boise. And so we decided not to say anything, and that was like for 23 years. So we go back, the guy on the table, right? He's finished. I'm glad we can go back to him because he's a great guy. Anyway, so he's all done. He puts his briefcase together. He goes to the door, and you know, we let him out. He's going to leave at the end of the day, and he stops, like, you know, 5 feet away, like he forgot something. He turns around, and you could tell it looked like he was working up to this. He says, they said you had something to do with the Furby. But you did everything. Right. So we shut the door, and, you know, we didn't do everything. I mean, thousands of people worked on it. You know, you don't invent something like the space shuttle that has all this influence, right? But Christy and I had that baby. You know, that was our idea in the beginning, and we can be proud of that. So I think there's another thing I learned since then, because, you know, Christy is like, you know, we don't want the celebrity, right? We don't need that. I don't want people looking at our family, and, you know, we don't need that. I kind of wanted that, right? You know? Could you imagine that, you know, that I would want that? And so it was really hard for me to work all these years in a career, and, you know, yeah, I won the race. So no, you didn't. It was that other guy, you know. Here's some money. So, but I think I woke up in the middle of the night the other night thinking about this, wondering, why did we do that? And I think it's self-worth comes from the inside, right? Not from the outside. And it is reflected in how you treat others. And that was, I think, the hard lesson for me, that you don't look to the outside for that. And I have an epilogue to this story. Epilogue to the story is that years later that summer, the suit was dropped. Actually, there wasn't a suit, and our papers had proved that, no one copied a Mogwai. Although if you get Furby wet, he does turn to a monster. But other than that, there's no relation at all. And strangely, or karmically, you might say, we got royalties on the Mogwai Furby. So, thank you. Born in Boise. Thank you. It's my wife, Christy. Christy, will you stand up? That's my wife, Christy. Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Caleb and Christy. When I say I also mean Christy and I. But I love how it feels like we've made a circle here, because I'm coming back to, I don't know why tonight is the night where we're really reflecting on story itself, which we don't often do. We usually just get up here and tell stories. But I'm realizing that this Furby is like this beautiful furry example of why it's so important for people to be able to have a place where they can share their own story, because it happens so often that people get erased from the story, and someone else tells their story, and they don't tell it well. And so it's nice to have a place where people can come and just tell their story, the way it is, the way it lives in them, and the way they can express it to our community. And I am grateful for that and every moment that I get to participate in that. Bring us a slammer! Now let's hear a story we'll regret hearing. So I can take back my words. Doesn't happen. Not often. Oh, and it's not going to happen with this person because she is a Story Night regular and also a story guide. It's Patty O'Hara. Come on up and share with us your 90s story.
Patty, yeah. So here I am. October 24th, 1991. We got a call, my husband and I, that was one of the most devastating and within moments became one of the best calls we ever would get. Our agent in Santiago, Chile called to say, Patricia, Ricardo, I'm sorry I have some bad news, but the child that we had referred to you is no longer available. I know you named him Patrick Egan O'Hara, but he is not yours. Unless you're willing to wait another 5 months, maybe 6, but because of some court snafus, he is not available. Do you want to wait? Well, we had been in this position before, not about waiting, but that letdown, that crushing letdown. For years, few years before that, congratulations, you're pregnant. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Hey, your due date is July 13th. I don't hear a heartbeat. I'm sorry. So we had been through this before in a different way. And so we were kind of ready, but you don't get ready. Do you want to follow through on this? We said, no, we can't do this. We can't take that chance. We can't wait. He said, All right, and we hadn't seen pictures of this Patrick. They had just gone ahead and named him for us. We didn't know this child yet. We just had visions, we had dreams like you do for any child that you're expecting. He said, all right, 3 days ago, another boy was born. Would you like us to refer you to him? Yes. We didn't even think, yes, of course. Let the process begin. They had our dossier. We had already switched from Peru to Chile. We're all set now, just continue. Let us pursue Chile and this other child. We waited and waited. 15 days, you gotta wait, put that in the paper, make sure there's no one there to claim that child. Get your plane tickets. Oh, sorry, the judge hasn't signed off in the letter. Cancel that flight. You make another flight arrangement. Sorry, we've got to put it in 15 more days. We're not quite sure yet. Cancel that flight. Finally, Christmas, it's not going to make it for Christmas. February 3rd rolls around. Make your reservation and fly out today. We did. We call that custody day. We arrived in Chile, and 2 hours later, we're in our little apartment, and there's a knock on the door, and it's our son. He's there. He's this little girl, little gypsy girl, the daughter of the gypsy woman Patrick had been with for 3.5 months, and his name at the time was Ricardo Patricio Rodriguez Rodriguez. Yeah, we didn't name him. They named him after us and his mother. We were going to change that, but okay. But there he was in the arms of this little girl with everything he possessed. He had a binky in his mouth, a little bear chupa, they called it, little shorts. It was summer in Chile. We left in winter in Chicago and arrived at summer in Chile. And there he is in his little shorts and his little shirt and his single bottle. I had a suitcase full of assorted sizes of bottles, but this is the bottle he wanted, I found out later. And she hands him over to us. My husband and I both went through postpartum depression. We're weeping with joy as the poor little girl thought we were rejected. Oh, you changed your mind? You know, no, this is happy tears. And we accepted him, of course, and we're just delighted. He had little cheeks like potatoes. In fact, people would come up and go, oh, papitas, little potatoes, and they'd squeeze them. I think that's why they're shaped like they are today with, you can see finger marks in his cheeks. He's, 28 and there are finger marks there still. But oh, the little papitas, he was just beautiful, still is beautiful. So we had our custody day, February 3rd. We celebrated court day. That's the day that we hope the judge is going to sign off in the letter and let us proceed. We took him to the Chilean doctor who gave him all these little bottles of drops, took him to the American embassy where that doctor threw the bottles away, said he doesn't need these. Took him off to get his ID card, his little Chilean passport. Still Ricardo Patricio Rodriguez Rodriguez. We were practicing, how are we going to get him to spell that? What I discovered, by the way, on that trip, I had packed a suitcase, just loaded it with disposable diapers and bottles and toys, all kinds of things, clothes, of course. And my husband unpacks his suitcase when we arrived. I'm backtracking a bit. And he opens his up. His suitcase was filled with hardcover books. I mean, is this so typical male or what? I'm so prepared. What's that about? Well, you don't know how long you're going to be there. You can't wash your books. You can wash laundry, but you can't. He was scared to death that we'd be there for a couple months and he'd run out of reading material. So we celebrated custody day. We celebrated gone to the judge day and he signed off in the letter day. He had a birthday. Later, when we brought him home, we have coming home day, February 13th. This is the beauty of being adopted, by the way. In international, you have Citizenship Day, August 13th. You have Adoption Day, that trip on the train to downtown Chicago when he's 1 year old and he's yours. Finally, we can call him Patrick Egan O'Hara, right? So you've got all these special days when you're adopted. It was wonderful. Anyway. October 24th, 1991, it all began. But the day that we remember every year, that we celebrate, and that we're going to celebrate on February 13th, is Patrick Egan Rodriguez O'Hara's 28th Coming Home Day. Happy Coming Home Day, Poe.
Patty, didn't you hear me say I was wearing mascara tonight? Oh, let's bring out another slammer, please. Oh, they're busy. Alternate? Nope, they're getting it. Here comes Bob. All right. Joanne Glaze.
If you wanna make a movie, then you better come in. It's just ability, that reason that we're so.
We go together, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We can go. Where are we going to? What would we go see?
Nirvana.
All right.
Let's go.
Okay, I'll be in the back.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm kind of nervous. I didn't expect this to happen, so bear with me, okay? So 90s. 90s was a great decade for me personally. I got married to my first husband and had my son. But I wanted to tell a story about the 90s that going into the 90s in the very beginning was a really transitional time for me. And it was kind of a scary time. And I was ending a relationship that was not great. We've all done that, right? And so I'm going to take you back to that time period. So I'll say it's about 1990, the very beginning of the decade, and I was dating a German gentleman named Thomas. And Thomas and I, we traveled together, we met traveling across the country, and we traveled through Mexico, and then he had this wonderful idea to move to Germany, and we did that together as well. So we were together maybe about 4 years. Well, bless his heart, he's a great guy, okay? Very controlling, very Germanic, and so that was kind of hard for me because I've always been very free-spirited, and but we got along okay. But he always had a plan. We were always going to do this, and then we were going to do that. And so I kind of went along with that for a while, right? And after, about the 4th year, this is the beginning of the 90s, it wasn't sitting right with me anymore. And so I thought, how am I going to break up with this guy? He's always got the answers. Everything, he's always right, And so, for example, we saw an article in a newspaper about Sesame Street, something wonderful about Sesame Street. And he said, Sesame Straße, good German company, good German children's show. I said, that's Sesame Street? That's an American company? No, Sesame Straße is German. Like, okay. So that's an example, okay? So this is what I kind of had to just go with after a while. Nice guy, like not abusive or anything, but just what a drag, right? So, and by the way, Scandinavian, tall, gorgeous, cheekbones galore. I mean, just, so there was that. But, and so finally, we're in Germany. We're living in Germany together in a group home, supervising juvenile delinquent boys. That was interesting. And he was the authoritarian person. I was the counselor type person. So my best friend from childhood in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up, was getting married. And she was getting married in Baltimore. And she wanted me to be part of the wedding. So she said, Joe, my nickname, you got to come to Baltimore and be in my wedding. You got to leave Germany and come home. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is my way out of the relationship. I mean, I love Germany, but I got to get out of this relationship. I don't know how to do it. That's hard, isn't it? So I said, Thomas, I'm going to go in August. I'm going to go to Fiona's wedding. I'm in the wedding. It's a really big deal. You understand. Of course, I go with you. I'm going with you. I am going to start my photography business, and we will be successful together, and we will live in America, and I'm going to America. And I'm like, what? No. So I'm going to go, and you're going to stay. Anyway, long story short, and tell me if my 5 minutes is coming up. So somehow, because he was Tomas and he had this way about him, he worked it. He ended up coming to Baltimore with me. So I went to the wedding, and he was with me, and long story short, again, there we are in Baltimore, and it's July 4th, and we're sitting on the front stoop of this place we're renting, and I'm really pissed at myself that I've allowed this to happen. How could I not have just told him, I just don't want you to come to America. I want to restart my life in the 90s. I want to go back to college. I want to get my degree. I started college and I gave it up, and I decided to travel and be this amazing actress or whatever. And now I want to get serious and go back to college, and it doesn't include you. So I never had that. I just couldn't do it. And so here we are in Baltimore, Maryland, sitting on the front stoop, July 4th, and he says, so this is what we're going to do now. Now that I am a photographer, and I've taught myself how to be a professional photographer with my Hasselblad camera, with a 5x5 and my Nikon camera, we are going to move to Kauai, Hawaii, and we are going to live in the backyard shed of our friends that we met in Mexico, who are going to let us live in their little shed, and we're going to sleep on the floor, and you are going to be my photographer's assistant. I don't do a very good job with a German accent, but I thought, I'm sitting on the front stoop, and it's July 4th, and I'm thinking, I want to go back to college. I want to be me. I want to live my dreams. So I told him, Tomas, that's a great idea. You go to Kauai and further your photography career. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay in Baltimore. I'm going to go to college and yeah, so that's what I did. And we said goodbye. We're still friends, by the way.
I'm just going to sit right here and wait for the king. Can we do one more slammer tonight? One more slammer? Can we do it? Let's do one last one. Bring us the box. There are so many people that enter tonight. I just want to get one more in. I'm feeling story hungry. I hate to say this, actually, but oh, sorry, Bob, this one is blank. That's not what I didn't want to say. What I didn't want to say is her boyfriend was slightly right, because Sesame Strauss is an independent production that is produced in Germany that mixes in with the American content. They have their own German characters that they do. So, like, there's no Big Bird in Germany, for instance. But I hope that doesn't destroy your life. All right, last slammer of the night. Let's bring up Lindsay Bauschier. Lindsay. She was worried about her parking. That's never happened before. All right, in that case, it's gonna be Ann Peach. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Hello, everyone. We're going to go back to 1991. I might as well take these off because I can't see you. And February. I was getting out of the shower, butt naked, looking in the mirror, and all of a sudden I kind of go, oh my goodness, I'm fat. I was about to be 31 years old. I had 3 kids. And I didn't like the way I looked. How many of you have looked into the mirror and kind of go, oh my goodness, you've got to change the way you eat. You've got to do some exercises. And so the 90s, you put on those little funny things on your legs and the little things around your head, and you go whoop, 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 and you try to work out and get into shape. Well, I had 3 kids, and so I did it at home. And you watch Richard somebody on Channel 4. Simmons, okay, you've watched him too. And he's there with his little okay, let's get up and let's exercise. Well, there is a lot of things I've learned since 1991. It is about eating, it's about moving. In fact, I walked here tonight. And it's about what goes on in your mind. And so it's a journey. Each one of us is on a journey. And when I can look out there and say, I celebrate your journey because I celebrate my journey, how many of us, whether it's the 90s or later or earlier, we have come to a turning point in our life when we say things have to change. And so on that day in 1991 in February, my life changed. And it has been a journey to health. And so tonight, I'm healthier than I was when I was 31. And I can keep up with my grandkids. So let's all be healthier to the 2000s and 20s.
And what's amazing, Anne said she walked here and she lives in Mountain Home. So I told her she should wear a white sheet around her as she walks back because those drivers need to be able to see her. All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Here comes our theme song. There it is. Thank you for the support from the Boise Arts and History Department. This program is also supported in part by the Idaho Commission on the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you to our media sponsors, Boise State Public Radio and Radio Boise. We also have a radio show. It's Story Night on Stray Theater, which you can hear the Sunday before this live show, so it aired just this last Sunday from 5:30 to 6 on Radio Boise. And of course, you can always listen to our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or however you listen to podcasts. The link is on our website. Thank you to our crew, Stephen Baldessari on Sound and Lights, our camera director, Stan Carey, and our photographer, Chelsea Harada. Look for our photos and tag yourself on our Facebook page in just a few days. Thank you to our volunteers and our volunteer coordinator, Stephanie Moore, and to all our volunteer board of directors. I thank you to our storytellers that we had tonight, Mr. Caleb Chung, Mr. David Lee, and Mr. Paul Schaefer. It was an honor to be on the stage with the 3 of you tonight. And I'm just going to end the night with this little ditty. Story, story night. Story, story, good night. Beginning, middle, now at the end. Story, story night. This is where I was supposed to come in. Story, story, good night. Forget you heard me sing that before. Beginning, middle, and now really at the end. There's more. Authentic, inspiring, spontaneous. So thank you. You shared your stories and you really listened. I may have come here as a stranger, but now I'm leaving as a friend. And so the story doesn't end. See you in January for the 00s. Good night. Happy New Year.